Hey YouTube, get down! It's the Terminator, and I'm back with another bodybuilding video for you. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about Phil Heath today. I know I've been talking about this guy a lot lately, but it's hard not to. He's the man of the hour. He's now the reigning six-time Mr Olympia. And so I just wanted to put this on record, go ahead and say it now before it happens, that I think that Phil is going to break Ronnie Coleman and Lee Haney's 8-time Mr Olympia record. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of compelling evidence to support that. I'm not just talking out of my ass or saying it because I like Phil. I'm a big fanboy and I want him to win 9 or 10 times in a row. No, it's not so much that I want him to, although that would be pretty cool, right? If he did manage to set a new record, I'd be the first to, kind of stand up and congratulate him and think that that'd be pretty awesome. But, the reason being is because there's a lot of reasons. I'm just going to kind of go through them in this video. And so I've got a few clips from his Mr. Olympia appearances. The first one is in 2011, which was his first victory. The second clip will be from 2014. And the third clip is from the most recent Mr. Olympia 2016. And the reason I want to show these clips to you is just to provide some more visual evidence to support my statement when I say that Phil Heath is one of the most consistent bodybuilders of all time at this point. From year to year, he's bringing pretty much the same package. He always looks very similar, similar to Dexter in that sense of how consistent he is. You know what you're getting with Phil. You're going to get the crazy conditioning, the very round, full muscle bellies, and complete development. And so he's very consistent. It makes it very easy to bet that he's going to win the show when he's bringing almost the same package every year. Because if he brings the same package that he brought last year and he won last year, then why would you expect him to lose this year? Right? So that's in stark contrast to former Mr. Olympia, one of the guys he's chasing, in Ronnie Coleman. Because Ronnie, his physique varied tremendously over the years. In 98 and 99, he was a little smaller, but he had just outrageous conditioning, especially in 1998. Whereas, in 2000, he was bigger, a little less conditioned. In 2001 and 2002, he was perhaps at his all-time smallest and weakest in terms of the physiques he was bringing that year. But then in 2003, he turned it all around when he came out and rocked the bodybuilding world, bringing the biggest package we had ever seen. It was kind of like a repeat of what happened in 1993 with Dorian. And then if you look at his last Mr. Olympia win in 2005, and you compare that body that he brought that year to, say, 1998, it was just completely different. I mean, you could argue that one thing that I noticed is his arms looked like they might have actually been regressing a little bit at that point. They didn't look quite as dominant, especially in poses like the front double bicep and the most muscular. His biceps just did not look as big as they used to. But on the other hand, the guy's legs were just crazy. He definitely brought up his wheels over the years. So if you compare the 2005 Ronnie Coleman to the 1998 Ronnie Coleman, and you look at the quads, you won't even think it's the same guy. So Ronnie, you kind of never knew what he was bringing, and it definitely made it interesting to watch to see how he was going to look that year. Whereas with Phil, you pretty much already know what he's going to look like the next year because he looks pretty much always the same. He might put on a little bit of size here or there. He might come in a little fuller one year than a previous year, or have some different types of details that you didn't notice before. But just like Dexter, he's very consistent and he brings pretty much the same physique year after year. So it makes it a really easy decision, or if you're going to bet, if you're going to place a bet on who's going to win, it's just a very good indication or probability that Phil's going to win because he's just so consistent and he's already winning with this physique, so he doesn't really have to change anything, right? If it's not broke, don't fix it. So that's the first reason I'd say. And let's just continue to roll this footage. This was one of his best years by far, 2011. He just had outrageous conditioning this year. Very aesthetic. I'd say his most aesthetic that he ever looked, aside from the 2010 Arnold, but that wasn't an Olympia appearance. So we're just talking about Olympias here. Um, Whereas in later years, he definitely put on some size, especially to his legs and his back. But I feel like he never really matched the aestheticism that he brought in this first win, even to date. Even though 2016 was a very good version of Phil, he was definitely bigger, especially in the leg department, than he'd ever been, and bigger than this. But I wouldn't say he was better. I still like the 2011 version the most of all his Olympia wins to date. Nevertheless, let's go on to another reason. So another reason, this was 2014. So you can notice that he's definitely fuller. His arms look huge this year. But that midsection, it looks fine right now, but it was not on point. And that's why his arms were awesome, though. Shit. Never really noticed that, but look how good his arms look here. But if you look at his midsection, you can kind of see it looks kind of like love handles, right? It's definitely thicker and blockier than it used to be. And it's more washed out, right? He doesn't have a clearly defined midsection here like he did in 2011. Or most of his other years, for that matter. And also, when he turns to the side, first of all, you guys all see that pointy nipple of a belly button he's got there. It just looks very odd and gross. You can see it from the side. See, you can already see some distension there in his gut. And look now, it's like, ugh, it's not a pretty picture. It just looks fucked up. Like, what is that thing? It's disgusting. I really wanted Kai to win this year for this reason, because this is not right. This does not deserve to be Mr. Olympia champion. When you have a midsection like this, you don't deserve to win, quite frankly. But the IBB judges didn't see it that way. Look at the gut there. Just not good. At the same time, though, aside from his midsection, there's very little you can knock Phil on this year. Right? Like, he was super full and very big for him. And he looked pretty sharp everywhere else. It wasn't his best condition for sure, but what he kind of lacked in conditioning, he kind of in a sense made up for with the fullness this year and the size. Because he was probably at his all-time biggest. I'm not sure if he was heavier or bigger this year, because he was also very large in 2016. But just based on this footage alone, it looks like he was probably at his all-time biggest here. But with a gut like that, it's not a worthy trade-off, But you can see, his conditioning is still good. It's not the best, especially by his very high standards for what he typically brings, but it's still a good package overall. Midsection aside, he still looks really good, right? So, and that's my point too, is that this was, in my opinion, and a lot of people would agree, his very worst show, his very worst Mr. Olympia appearance. Yet he still won the title. He still held on to it. He still fended off a very, very strong Kai Green. I don't think he deserved to win, but that's the advantage that he has being the reigning champ. It's kind of like a home field advantage, because the judges are kind of going to favor you over everyone else, and pretty much you have to deliver a knockout blow to take out the champ when it comes to Mr. Olympia. You can't just kind of squeak by and edge him out. No, you have to decisively beat him. And sometimes even if you do decisively beat him, like I felt Kai decisively beat him that year. I felt Victor Martinez decisively beat Jay Cutler in 2007. Because in 2007, Jay looked like he was friggin' a month out of the show. He was so soft and watery, it looked like he was off-season, for crying out loud. But that's the politics that are involved at the Olympia level. So sometimes even when they deserve to be beaten, they're not going to lose because the judges just won't allow it. So that's another huge reason why I think Phil's going to continue to win and continue to rack up more Mr. Olympias, is because of the politics. He has the judges on his side, so to speak, or it seems that way at least. I'm not saying he's not deserving his victories. I feel like he earned every one of them, except for 2014, mind you, as I just mentioned. I don't think he earned that one. I think that was kind of gifted to him. But all the others, I feel like, yeah, he deserved it. And so let's just go over some of these reasons again. His consistency, his complete total development. You always kind of know what you're getting with Phil, and if he continues to replicate the same package, we got to expect him to continue to win. The home field advantage, if you will, of being the current champion and having, the political advantage over some of his competition. Another reason is the youth. Phil Heath is only 36 still, guys, and he's already won 6 Mr. Olympias. By the time Ronnie Coleman won his 6th Mr. Olympia in 2003, he was already 39. So Phil's 3 years younger than Ronnie was at the same stage of having won 6 Mr. O's. And the difference, here's the 2016 version, by the way. Very good year for Phil this year. He was very full and still very conditioned, and his midsection was definitely better than what it was in 2014. But anyway, there's a huge difference between Phil and Ronnie's training styles, right? When you see these guys working out in the gym, I mean, Ronnie was lifting ungodly amounts of weight, just incredible feats of strength. The guy was throwing around, 200-pound dumbbells on the bench press for 12 reps, 800-pound deadlift for 2 reps, like 5 weeks out of a show, pretty much collecting every single 45-pound plate in the gym when he was leg pressing. Brian Dobson, the owner of Metroflex, where Ronnie was training at that time, he added it up and it was around 2,300 pounds. The dude was leg pressing for 8 or 10 reps or whatever it was. Just insane, ungodly strength. Super impressive, super intense, super inspiring to watch Ronnie work out. Not quite the same with Phil. No offense, Phil, but a lot of workout footage you put out, it just looks like you're not even into it. It looks like you're hardly trying. You're not throwing around any kind of impressive weight. It's just not very motivating to watch Phil work out in comparison to Ronnie. Now, not all the time. I have seen some pretty impressive footage of Phil, lifting, cranking out the 170s on incline dumbbell press for like 20 reps, doing some very heavy, side laterals and front raises and that sort of thing. But for the most part, he's just not, he doesn't bring that killer instinct that guys like Ronnie and Dorian did back in the day. So it's just not as motivating to watch him work out. But at the same time, this is bodybuilding, right? We're not really, it's not about how much weight they can throw around in the gym and how impressive their workouts can be. Although that is very, very cool if you can do that. But at the end of the day, it's about what you look like on stage. So if you can look this great on stage, while working out with like half the weights that maybe a former champ like Ronnie would have used, more power to you, right? So in the long term, I think Phil's approach is actually better. It's more sustainable. I would say he works out smart. He doesn't train super intensely. He doesn't lift crazy poundages, but he does what he needs to get the job done, to make his physique look very impressive. So if you can do that without stressing your body and without putting yourself at risk for serious injury, good on you. Dexter is another guy who trains similar to Phil. None of his workouts are particularly awe-inspiring, and yet he's had the longest career and most successful career in IFBB history. So it's obviously a sound approach to the craft of bodybuilding, to train a little smarter maybe, and don't kill yourself in the gym. Don't put yourself at risk for injury like Ronnie and Dorian did, training with super heavy weights close to the show and cheating reps and stuff like that. That's why I think Phil has the potential to continue to crank out these wins, because I just don't see him getting injured the way that he trains. It seems very unlikely that something like him tearing a lat or a bicep like what Ronnie or Dorian did is going to happen to Phil because of his training style. So that's another mark in his favor. And lastly, we got to talk about the competition. In my opinion, Phil's not really being pushed that hard by anybody right now. And nobody is a serious threat to him right now. And I don't see anybody being a serious threat to him in the next at least 2 to 3 years. So if we want to go through some of the top guys and just kind of compare them quickly to Phil and how they measure up. So let's look at Dexter, right? Another guy who's extremely consistent, always brings that great conditioning, very aesthetic and shapely, full muscle bellies. He even beats Phil in certain poses like a side chest. But the knock on Dexter, aside from the youth advantage that Phil has, I mean, Phil still probably hasn't even reached his prime, believe it or not. Guys tend to peak very late in the sport of pro bodybuilding. Around 40-ish is when they're typically at their all-time best these days. And Phil's only 36, like I just mentioned. Dexter's already 47. So Dexter's already, even though he seems to be hanging on that peak, if you will, and he's more or less looked the same for the last like 5 or 10 years, and he's still supremely gifted and looks amazing, he can only decline. He's not going to get much better, if any better. I think he'll only get progressively worse in the next coming years, just because age, you can't fight it forever. Even if he's an immortal vampire, like a lot of people joke, eventually it's going to catch up to him, or he's going to lose motivation. You know, he's a family guy, right? He has a family. He's going to want to hang it up at some point and retire. And I think that's going to probably happen within the next 5 years, for sure. I don't think he's going to reach 52 and still be competing like what Kevin Ronnie just did this year. I don't think that's going to be the case with Dex. I think he's going to probably hang it up in the next 1 to 3 years, would be my guess. He was already kind of mentioning the topic of retirement. That's why I say that too. But anyway, the thing with Dexter that he really lags behind Phil on is the lower body. Okay, their upper bodies are very comparable. He's very close to Phil in the back and in the arms, the shoulders, and all that, but he's got a better midsection. But when you go downstairs, Dexter's legs are not on Phil's level. The calves, he gets smoked. The quads are not nearly as big. Same with the hams and the glutes. Just Phil's superior in the lower body. So for that reason, and for the youth advantage that he has, I don't see Phil losing to Dexter ever. Okay? Next guy, let's talk about Sean Roden, another dude who's very aesthetic. He's kind of like a slightly taller, more streamlined version of Phil in certain ways. But, again, he just doesn't measure up to Phil in certain body parts, like the back. Phil's back is undeniably superior to Roden's. He's going to crush him all day in the back double biceps pose because he has so much more thickness and full development. And in the arm department, too, Phil has thicker, bigger arms. They're just better than Roden's, genetically speaking. Roden's biceps and triceps, he doesn't have the same thickness. They look more two-dimensional, if that makes sense, as opposed to Phil's. So, and again, Phil has the youth advantage on him. Sean's older. He's already 40 or 41. So I don't see Sean defeating Phil ever. Another guy, let's talk about Big Ramy. You know, Big Ramy's probably, on paper, the most legitimate threat to Phil Heath, now that Kai Green seems to be out of the Mr. Olympia discussion. So the problem with Big Ramy, as I did a whole video on this, guys, so if you want to check it out, I explain it in detail in my previous video where I talk about why Ramy will never be a Mr. Olympia. That sounds really harsh. It sounds like I'm hating, but that's just the way I see it. So if you want to know those reasons, basically it all boils down to politics, but if you want to hear an in-depth explanation, go check out that vid. I'll put a link in the description or maybe on the video here. So Ramy's not a legitimate threat as far as I see it. There's a bunch of up-and-comers, like new guys. Justin Compton, Dallas McCarver is very much hyped and talked about and touted as the next Mr. Olympia. Josh Lenarkowitz, or however you say his last name, the Australian dude who came in extremely conditioned this year, looked very impressive. None of these guys are yet within striking distance of Phil, okay? If you're not in the top 3 guys in the world, you're not really, at this point, a serious contender, okay? It's very rare for a guy to come out of nowhere and just take the crown. Ronnie did it in his first Mr. Olympia when he jumped from 8th or 9th in the 1997 Mr. Olympia to winning it in 1998, but that's a very, very, extremely rare exception. And I don't see that happening again, especially not with Phil as the champ. So I just don't see anybody right now who's poised to take the crown from him. Oh, another guy, Dennis Wolf. We got to talk about him. Even though he wasn't in this year's Mr. Olympia, lots of people, he has a lot of fans, a lot of support, a lot of people who are saying he's Mr. Olympia material. And I have to respectfully disagree. Because the thing with Dennis Wolf is that even though he's very impressive, and I love his classic posing, he's got a lot of impressive body parts and aspects to his physique, like his width that Phil really lacks. He's got height over Phil, although height doesn't really count for much in bodybuilding, let's face it. He has tremendous thighs, excellent quad sweep, excellent hamstring sweep. He's got some of the craziest conditioning, and he's got tremendous width through his lats, great shoulders, but he's got a lot of weak points too, right? He has no calves. That's, that's an area that he's always going to lose to Phil in, and he's going to lose to pretty much everybody in the calf department. Even Dexter has better calves. Another thing he's lacking, his arms aren't even close to Phil's. Not even close. And, of course, his lower back. Lower back is very important at the Olympia level because it really separates the top guys from kind of the next tier guys. So Dennis Wolf with his high lats and all those other weak points I just mentioned is not a legitimate contender, okay? Sorry to break it to you guys, but that's just the way I see it. I don't see anybody being a true threat to Phil in the next 3 to 4 years, and that's why I think, barring any unforeseen injuries or serious training injuries like a torn lat or a torn bicep, like what happened with Ronnie and Dorian, that would really throw off Phil's symmetry and his complete development, I just don't see Phil losing in the next 3 to 4 years. I think he's going to easily capture 9 or 10 Sandow's before this is all said and done. He might even go on to capture more than 10. Who knows? But I don't see him losing in the next 3-4 years for that reason. And I guess, he could get sick, like what happened to him before the 2009 Mr. Olympia when he was throwing up before the show and he lost like 10 pounds. But that seems highly unlikely, especially because it's already happened once in his career. I don't expect him to go through that kind of thing again. And with his more controlled, less intense training style, I don't see him suffering from a serious injury like what happened to Ronnie or Branch Warren. And I don't think his physique's going to be compromised as a result. I think he'll continue to bring this stellar, complete package and continue to make minor improvements year to year and continue to hold that title. So that's it. Those are the reasons why I think Phil's going to continue to reign as Mr. Olympia for the next several years and why I think he'll ultimately end up breaking that record in 3 years' time. So let me know if you guys agree in the comments below and what your thoughts are on the whole situation. Whether you love him or hate him, this isn't really about whether you're a Phil fanboy, whether you think he's a cocky, arrogant bastard, or what have you. This is not a personality contest. I'm just talking strictly in terms of the physique, in terms of the politics that be in the IFBB, and I'm just trying to keep it real with you.